It is very important that we follow the specific instructions given to us in questions like this. Number one, we got to make sure we're doing the right thing. Which finding from the experiment, if true, most directly support these people's hypothesis? So sometimes these questions say, what would weaken the hypothesis? If we don't pay attention to that, we are going to have the completely opposite idea of what we're supposed to be looking for, right? So we need to pay attention to that. Support, weaken, that is completely opposite task. So if you miss that and get it wrong, oh boy, what a waste. So you got to always read these. More important than that, or just as important, it's not a more important thing, they're equally important, we've got to make sure we focus on the hypothesis. This is a long passage. I can already tell just from the fact that there's this like italics at the beginning that we have some sort of science here about some species. That means it's probably going to be hard to follow at times, and that's okay. But we're specifically being told to focus on the hypothesis. So there's probably lots of information in here, but I'm going to really start paying very close attention when I get to these people's hypothesis. And here's one very nice thing the SAT does for us. They usually just say their hypothesis was, or some equivalent of that. So it's not like it's hidden. But I think a lot of people have trouble with these questions because they are so focused on just absorbing all the information and they don't pay attention to the fact that there's like a sentence here that matters more than the others. So I'll point it out when we get to it. It should be obvious. You should see it coming. The North American wood frog lays its eggs in shallow ephemeral ponds, often in clusters attached to submerged vegetation. Researchers Roberto Beauharnais and Jerome Urquhart recorded the size of these egg clusters in various ponds over several years. They found that ponds with noticeable surface algae, which can lower the dissolved oxygen levels of fresh water, tended to have clusters with fewer eggs. They hypothesized that this frog could sense the oxygen level of a pond and deposit fewer eggs into ponds where low oxygen levels could jeopardize their offspring's survival. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. Let's get a dumb summary, right? Because that's the hypothesis. So what is the hypothesis? It is that they will have fewer eggs when there's low oxygen. Low oxygen. Okay, cool. Let's keep reading, but that seems to be it. Of course, maybe there's more to it, but let's keep it dumb. Dumb summary for a reason. To test their hypothesis, these researchers devised an experiment in which some frog specimens were introduced to tanks with simulated ponds that varied only in the dissolved oxygen levels of the water, right? Okay, that seems to be what matters. If the frog chose to lay eggs in the simulated pond, the size of the egg cluster was recorded. So notice they don't say the finding of the study, and that's because which finding from the experiment, if true, would most directly support these people's hypothesis. Now, another key piece of this instruction is that the answer choices are going to be giving us new information that is not explicitly in the passage. So a lot of times when we have passages and we're evaluating choices, we can be like, well, they didn't say that. They didn't say this. We can get rid of these choices because they're putting in information they didn't say. That's fine in those cases, but this question specifically is telling us you are getting new information. Don't evaluate whether it's actually true or not. Just assume that it's true, but which one would undermine or weaken or, which would support this hypothesis? So we gotta be careful. See, I'm already messing it up and I already made a big deal about it. So which one would support the hypothesis? Well, that means we don't need to do anything. Let's keep the hypothesis. We want it to somehow say that there were fewer eggs when there was less oxygen. So let's just see if anything kind of sounds like that, and we'll deal with any, differences when we get to them. A, regardless of the oxygen level of the simulated ponds, the frog specimens in the experiment laid fewer eggs, than did the wild L. sylvaticus specimen studied earlier. Okay, so two things bother me about this. Regardless of the oxygen level is telling me that there is no change or no significance to the oxygen. But notice that our summary says the oxygen matters, right? It's related to the number of eggs. So if there was no difference in the oxygen, if it didn't have any effect, that doesn't seem like it's going to support our hypothesis. Beyond that, I don't remember them comparing the frogs in the study, in the experiment, to the wild frogs, right? The point of this is where we're just focused on the experimental frogs, I guess. So this has got a couple problems that I don't love. Let's look at B. The simulated ponds with the highest oxygen levels were consistently found to have the greatest number of eggs per cluster. So here we have high oxygen. I'll try to mimic what we had before. So high oxygen means greater eggs, more eggs. Okay, so does that support what we said before? Well, it seems to be the opposite of what we said before, right? We said before that it was less eggs meant, or lower oxygen mean lower eggs, right? This is more oxygen is more eggs. But that's kind of the same thing, right? The arrows are flipped, but they're both flipped, right? The relationship is preserved. This is, a positive correlation. As one thing goes up, the other thing goes up. As one thing goes down, the other thing goes down, right? So this seems like it could support it. Let's look at C. Let's see what else we've got. Well, the difference in size of the egg clusters was statistically insignificant. So again, this is saying that there's no change or no importance to the eggs, but we want the eggs to matter. That was the whole point. The eggs laid in simulated ponds with lower oxygen levels were less likely to hatch than those laid in higher oxygen ponds. Well, did we talk about them hatching? I don't think so, right? So, right, if we go back, we were talking about them depositing fewer eggs, but I don't think they really said anything about them hatching, just whether they laid them. So I don't know. I don't know if they're less likely to hatch. I don't love that they're saying no eggs at all matter. So let's get rid of that one. D, the size of L. savaticus egg clusters in the simulated pond showed a negative correlation with the pond's oxygen level. So that means that if eggs go down, then the oxygen goes up, or vice versa, right? Which, depending on which variable you care about is first. But regardless, if there is a negative correlation, that means these things move in opposite directions. So if there's more oxygen, there's fewer eggs. If there's less oxygen, there's more eggs. That's the opposite of what we wanted to say. So B ends up being the answer. This is pretty straightforward to me. The similarity of the arrows helps me here. I would absolutely use my scratch paper for this. Maybe not writing as many things as I did for you guys, but I would definitely have written this dumb summary up there. And then maybe as I went, I would try to see if I could make a dumb summary that kind of matches it. Keeping track of those arrows is really, really useful. And this is just a scary question, and it's easy to get lost. But it also goes to show we need to know certain things like negative correlation. So in a way, since the theme of this exercise is following instructions and making sure you do what you're told, negative correlation is, in a way, its own instruction, right? We need to be able to understand that instruction means that if we're going to draw some sort of math equation like I did, the arrows move in opposite directions. Sometimes it's called an inverse correlation. It's the same idea. It's a very mathematical way of thinking about science. And so we need to be comfortable with that and be able to understand how to draw these things out. So lots of instructions to follow. In a way, that's what most of the passages end up being. But at every step of the way, I was able to just focus on kind of one or two things at a time because I knew exactly what the SAT was asking me to do. Support a hypothesis. Let's go find the hypothesis. Let's summarize the hypothesis. That's kind of my instruction for you. And then we get to the choices. Let's find one that matches our dumb summary and, just kind of deal with it in a very mathematical way. Ask if you have questions about this one. It is tricky, but this is a great strategy that you're definitely going to use when there's a lot of these science experiment questions, these support weakened questions. But always start by reading every passage question's actual question so you know if they want you to support it or weaken it, because that'll change our tactics a bit.